morning's meeting of the County Council Executive. Could I welcome you all? Voice is coming on high. So first of all, could I have apologies for absence, please, Rachel?
Thank you. We don't have any apologies for absence today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, are there any declarations? I'm not seeing any. Nobody's indicating, so I'll move straight on to any announcements by the leader, councillors or executive directors. Also, I've just got one announcement in terms of the, obviously, council agreed our last full council meeting to have a campaign about the highways funding. So we've been lobbying government ever since, and indeed with other councils. So that, I think, has been quite an extensive campaign. Unfortunately, I wish I could tell you that we've had some success, but as yet we've not, having not received the final settlement for our local transport from the Department for Transport. The indications, I have to say, are not particularly promising. So the feeling at the moment is that our settlement could be very similar to last year's, but the campaign will continue and we live in hope that the government will actually look at it. And I think there has been some national profile on this as well. So, but the campaign continues, but I'm afraid at the moment not with a lot of success. Are there any further announcements anybody wishes to make? Okay, thank you for that. I'll then move on to the minutes of the executive held on the 5th of January 2022. Is it your wish I sign these as a true and accurate record, please? All agreed? Nobody not agreed? Thank you very much. Okay, so then I'll move on to the first key item, which is the Council Budget 22-23. Obviously, at the last meeting, we went out for a draft budget, which has been out to consultation for the last month. And so I'll now let Andrew Crookham just update us on any movements on that.
Thank you, Leader. So a paper has been circulated around the chamber to provide an update on the predominantly the collection fund figures that we've received from the districts. It was very much right to the wire in terms of getting all of those figures in and understanding the impacts of them. And Michelle will talk through that note briefly in a minute. Just to also update, we received the final settlement from the government last night. The initial view is that there aren't any material changes to the figures that were outlined in the budget. We still have to work through some of the impacts of things like the public health grant allocations, and that'll continue. And that's why we'll suggest that when you agree your recommendations, Leader, that we retain clauses 4 and 5 in the recommendations, which gives you delegation to make any final changes. It would also give you the flexibility should there be any movement on that previous announcement that you made at the start. So with that, I'll hand over to Michelle for that detail, please.
Thank you very much. So Appendix A in the report is the original budget proposals made by Executive on the 5th of January, and the service budgets that were included in there haven't been changed from what was proposed in that report. As Andrew has mentioned, at the time of publishing the report, we were still waiting for the District Council figures, and the impact of those have now been circulated to you on the update. The updates kind of fall into the categories of council tax base. So this is the number of people that are paying council tax and reflects housing growth. And this was a positive update with growth at around 2%, which was above the 1.5% we'd assumed in our calculations. The Council Tax Collection Fund, it's an in-year movement of the tax actually collected against the planned income. And we'd assumed a deficit on this, which reflected last year's kind of movement. But that actually came in as a positive of £3.5 million, £3.4 million. The next element of that categories is the business rates collected locally in the collection fund. And as you can see that we've got a deficit position on the local business rates collected. This is mainly due to the business rate reliefs being offered by the government at the moment, and we should be compensated through Section 31 grants for that, so that is predominantly offset. And the last change in terms of that funding situation is the business rates pool. The executive will be aware that we continue to be in a business rates pool with the district councils, which enables us to retain elements of business rates growth. Whilst it's still a benefit to be in that pool, the expectations are that the benefits of that will be less than we expected, so we've reduced the assumption on there by £1 million. So the net effect of those changes is that we should have a budget surplus of £3.592 million. As that's predominantly around the collection fund, it's not a permanent base surplus, but nevertheless a surplus all the same. And at the moment, the report proposes that is moved to the earmarked reserves, but obviously that is part of your discussion this morning. The published report also includes consultation feedback on the budget proposals, and an update of that has also been circulated to ensure that you've got the feedback from all of the scrutiny committees, as well as Overview and Scrutiny Management Board, and the stakeholder consultation meeting. We've also received quite a lot of feedback through the website and emails, including from a number of parish councils, and the feedback is generally quite supportive of the proposals being made. The report also includes updates to our capital strategy and medium-term financial strategy, which will go forward to Council. Whilst these have been refreshed, there's been no major changes to any approach in our approach in these areas. And at that point, I'll hand over for any questions or discussion.
Thank you for that, Michelle. Just summarise on the, could somebody just summarise the feedback we had from the consultation, please? I know it's been circulated, just so that generally looking through it, generally positive, but obviously as usual some...
I think the feedback that we've had is generally recognising the cost pressures around adult care. Obviously the proposals have mainly, or the feedback has mainly picked up on the fact that the precept was to support the adult care proposals, and my view, the feedback is that we generally was generally very supportive of that and understanding the cost pressures in this area. Also some feedback about prioritisation of the council's funding. Again, comments around the road maintenance and you know the desire to keep our roads well maintained. So I think the feedback was generally quite positive.
So in terms of that, it's fair to say that our current original proposals in terms of the council budget, in most of the council budget is probably we haven't received any great objections to it, which is useful. No, could I just ask Andy Gutherson, we're still waiting then today. We haven't had the settlement from the Department for Transport for our highways budgets.
We've not had anything further, Councillor Hill, that sort of clarifies the current position, no.
Thank you. So I think we had the debate about the main budget a month ago, so I think it's fair to say that that would seem to be, the consultation has gone reasonably positively. So I think it still leaves us then with this £12 million problem, which I think we've got to look at. As we're aware, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the campaign carries on, but I think we have to make a recommendation to the full council next week on Friday, and I think we've got to be realistic and actually decide what the council should do should we not receive any sort of that £12.5 million from the government. So I think we've got to act as prudently and say, well, on the assumption we're not going to receive the money, we still hope we will, that we've got to come up with some recommendations on how we deal with that 12 million. So, Councillor Davies, I mean, I think in terms of feedback you've had, I think there is a general view from the public and from councillors that we could, of course, just reduce our highways budget by £12 million. That is an option, but just want to explore that thought to start with.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I think the reality is people of Lincolnshire don't think we spend enough on the roads already. So the idea that we'd spend even less, it would be cataclysmic, I think, for them. And it's interesting when you look at the feedback we've had at the budget proposals, and also more generally on social media from parish councils in particular, there is an acceptance, I think, whereas in the past perhaps we weren't getting the maximum impact out of our buck as we used to. We are spending the limited resources we've got now well, and people are grateful for the work they see. They see the investment in new technology from JCB. They see the new investment in hotboxing, for example. We're fixing more things first time. What they want is more of the same. And I think if the government don't provide the additional funding to backfill as they should do, I don't think we have any choices but a combination of reserve cuts and potentially council tax increases. I don't think that's avoidable. I think we should also mention, and forgive me, Leader, you'll remember on the call we had with the Department for Transport where we were told implicitly that Transport for London doesn't receive any central government funding. I'd point out last Friday a further extension was given by the government to Transport for London on the £4.5 billion bailout they've already had, with a view to giving them another potentially £2 billion payout. So when people say, where is all our council taxpayer money going, I think we can clearly say it's going to keep the cost of public transport in London low.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's my view as well. And I think there is a clear view. And obviously, the elections we had last year, there was a very strong message from the public and the voters that they want to see more money spending on, or at least the same amount of money on the roads. And that's the one thing that came over loud and clear. I think 70% of the responses were about potholes and the state of the roads. And we know we've got a big challenge on, so whatever we do, there is no magic wands short of about £500 million being dropped on Lincolnshire to mend all the roads. So I think we are in a situation where we are managing as best we can. I have to say, and I do get criticised for this sometimes, that when I drive around, the roads are in a reasonable state, and we are keeping on top of it and improving where possible compared to a few years ago. So it would be very unfortunate if we took a 25% reduction in our highways budget, because we would lose all that ground we made. And as we all know, a stitch in time saves 9. And if you neglect the roads for a few years, you pay the price later. And talk to colleagues across the country where, unlike us a few years ago, where we protected the highways budget, they reduced it according to the government reductions in funding. And they regretted it ever since, because it's cost them far more to try and get back to the place where the roads are better. We are particularly vulnerable in Lincolnshire, A, because we're a rural area, which means we've got more miles of roads. We have a less population to pay for the roads, and that's always been an issue. And we know that we've got the fair funding campaign going on as well, where we would just want a fairer deal from government, and if we had that fairer deal, we would be able to, as part of our priorities, manage the roads and spend even more on the roads. But the situation is as it is, and I think we have to make some choices, political choices about this. So in terms of, Andrew, just summarise, to balance our budget as it stands at the moment, before there are any changes, can you just explain where we are with that in terms of what savings we're proposing over the next few years and what use of reserves, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, thanks, Leader. So briefly in summary, the 5th of January report to Executive outlined a savings strategy over the next 4 years, which is designed to reduce bureaucracy, back office costs across the council, as well as make a more proactive approach to managing demand-led services. And that outlined new savings of a figure of around about £25 million over the next 4 years, and clearly the council will be fully committed to delivering that via its transformation programme. The future funding position of the council is still unclear. We still await the outcome of the fair funding review, and noises coming out from the government, particularly yesterday on the back of the settlement announcement, suggest it's a tweak to data rather than a fundamental reform of our future funding. We have gaps in years 2, 3 and 4 of the plan of £9, £6, £7 million respectively, and the current plan is to use the financial volatility reserve to manage those reductions, which would reduce that from a figure of about £44 million to about £21 million as it stands at the moment. So that's the current plan in terms of savings and use of reserves.
Thank you. I mean, I think the backdrop of this also, in terms of savings over the last 10 years, is it £300 million worth of savings, which we found already. So we're not dealing from a position of strength. And as you've explained, the reserves, we are going to actually raid those or use those just to balance our books, notwithstanding what we decide to do about the topping up or topping up the highways maintenance budget. I think it's clear to understand as well, although we're setting a one-year budget today, we have a 3-year problem with the highways maintenance, because the government's, when it finally makes its announcement, will be for 3 years, both for the Department for Levelling Up and whatever it's called, Levelling Up and Department for Levelling Up and what? Can't remember. Anyway, our mother department, that's had its 3-year settlement, and whatever the Department of Transport decides, that will also be for a 3-year settlement. So we've got a 1-year budget and we've got a 3-year problem. And there is some flexibility in the council tax, but even if we took the maximum we were allowed to, that still wouldn't give us the 12 million every year. So that will be 3 times 12 million. So we're nearly talking about a £40 million hole in the budget at the moment. So even if we went to the maximum, we would still need to take other measures. So that's why we're thinking that we're clear that we don't want to reduce the highways maintenance budget, but we do want to, we've got to come up with a realistic prospect. So the current proposals were that in terms of our budget, we were going to freeze the main council tax precept we were going to put on, and as most other, I think nearly all other authorities, and take the adult care precept as well. So I think in the situation we are in, I think my recommendation is that instead of freezing that general council tax, we put it up by 2%. So that will generate £6 million, which of course is only just over half of the amount we need to protect the highways budget. And then we come up with a combination of use of reserves and finding other mechanisms where we can find the extra money to give us the £12 million we need. Even with that increase in council tax, we will still be the second lowest in the country, even if we do that, because I'm aware that all other councils are going up to their allowed limit, which we're not doing, of course, because we are not going to the full limit we could do. But I think an increase in council tax plus a combination of savings and finding underspends and use of reserves, which is probably the best way forward. And I think we need to be clear that as we move forward, we do need to bear down again on the running costs of the council, which we've done twice now. But I think probably once we have our final settlement from the government, we know what we need to do, and probably there does need to be another revisit of see if we can find even more savings than we already have done. So that is the general thought, but I'll be very welcome any further comments. Councillor Davies.
Yes, Leader, I think that's perhaps our only choice. The one thing I would add into that is, as well as finding savings, I think we need to have a long, hard discussion with ourselves and with the public about what we do. And I think there may be a case of there are some things we currently do that we're going to have to stop doing or cut back on. Because if the government isn't going to provide us with the level of funding we need, then we can't continue to offer the same level of service. And that may be reductions in other areas, or longer term, if we don't get some rationale behind the highways budget, we can't, I can feel Andrew breathing down my neck as I say it, we can't continue to pay out from reserves to fund the gap. And that may lead, perhaps next year or even the year after, to some even more painful decisions that have to be made.
I think there is a case for a fundamental. Once we know the future for the next 3 years, or think we know, there is a case. I think you're right, looking at what we do and making sure we are doing it as whatever we decide to do, that is being done as efficiently as possible. A lot of the stuff we do, as you're all aware, is statutory, but are we delivering that as efficiently as we possibly can? And like any sensible organisation, we should be challenging ourselves to make sure that we are as efficient as possible, because things move on and things change. I'm awfully sorry. When we were talking about the scrutiny, I did forget about the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which actually was looking at the main budget. Unfortunately, Councillor Parker can't be with us today, but Vice Chairman Councillor Smith is here. So, Tom, would you like to just summarise what the debate that was had at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee?
Thank you, Leader. In principle, before the changes you alluded to, the committee, with the exception of Councillor Parker, who abstained, were supportive of the proposals. Highways was mentioned, as you can imagine, and there was questions made as to what we do in terms of the budget, and is there any way we can find the additional money, again, to do with the 12 million funding gap that we've been left with. very much mirroring the conversation the executive has already had. There were other sort of issues alluded to, as you've said, sort of the savings. Where can we find them? Because as you've already said, Leader, that we've saved £300 million. You know, that's no small figure for a county council or a local authority. You know, that might not be too much to central government, but to us that's a lot of money. So there were concerns that there isn't much more to cut off really, without going through bone, to use a metaphor. Questions around smarter working and the projected set or possible savings in the projection were also queried through Andrew, and Andrew's and correct me if I'm wrong, fairly confident that we can make those savings as projected, but principally it was around highways and what we can do, and possibly the impact of the adult social care precept around the rises at OSMB itself. Thank you.
Yeah, so generally positive supportive of the budget with those comments. Right, so I come back to sort of the issue about how we deal with this £12 million or £40 million gap we are currently looking at. Could I have comments, please? Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Leader. Reluctantly, I agree. I think we have no choice in the proposal going forward and take the extra 2% in terms of council tax this year. But I think, you know, we have to recognise the £12.5 million we moved last year by Department of Transport from our budget, the same again this year, is simply unacceptable in terms of the services that we need to provide in terms of our road network here in the county. So, you know, I reluctantly support what we need to do, but I think we really do need to focus hard on the opportunities of the last 2 years in terms of how we reorganise ourselves as a council, how we deliver services, using technology and using opportunity to try and drive through some of the savings we're still going to need to find quite clearly. And I think the other message is, of course, is that construction inflation is already very, very high. So even by filling the gap of the 12 million, we're actually not filling the gap, because we probably need £15 million this year to deliver the same level of services. So we're going to have to find that gap through savings right now. So there is a real challenge. So I reluctantly support the proposal that we go with the extra council tax rise as proposed.
Yes, I agree with what's being suggested. I think being a councillor in quite a rural area, I do have some B roads and the odd A road, but majority are really small country roads. And, you know, we have left them. That's quite right. They don't get the amount of traffic that actually our A and B roads do. But, you know, people do live down them, and mainly farmers or and people who want to live really in the countryside. But I do think, you know, they do expect some sort of reasonable surface on the road. They don't expect a flat surface, but they do expect their potholes to be filled and things like that. They pay council tax the same as anybody else. So it is a difficult situation we're in. And as Councillor Davies just said, we were £12 million short last year, which we put money in. We're going to be another 12 million this year. And that compounded, when you think what we haven't done this year, as the leader was saying, you know, those jobs are still going to probably be there in the 6 months or a year's time. Everything's going to be in a backlog. So I do think we should do something. I do think people will understand. It is a problem, because obviously we've had over the last week about the rise in fuel costs and all sorts of things like that people are going to have to pay as well. But actually we all do need to move around this county. You know, we haven't got the underground, we haven't got trains, and we don't have a lot of buses in some places. So people are reliant on their car to get to do their shopping or go to the doctors. So I don't think we have any option really, other than doing what we're doing. And you know, that's my view. And I think people, when I go out and talk to them, you know, they understand the predicament we're in as well. I think we've told them many times how low funding our council is, and I think they do understand.
Just to come back, if I may. Yeah, I completely agree, Councillor Bradwell. I mean, I think the reality is, unlike some other areas, such as even locally in the East Midlands, we don't have what the nationally is referred to as the strategic road network that other areas do. You know, Nottinghamshire, Leicestershire, all of these places have big dual carriageways and motorways going through them that do kind of what you could almost call a lot of the grunt work out of that core, you know, transiting around. Even in North Lincolnshire, they have a motorway. We don't have that. I think we have about 20 miles of strategic road network in the A1 and a bit of the A46, and that is it. So we start from a low base. And I think the other thing I'd point to, and Andy will correct me if I'm wrong, but I also think, you know, the government's also hitting us with things like changes to fuel duty scheme. So if I'm right, you know, the construction industry will no longer be able to use red diesel, for example. So we're seeing an uplift in construction costs, as well as what, you know, Councillor Davey rightly refers to as general inflation. And it's almost being attacked on all sides. It does feel like we are being forgotten as a transport and a highways authority. That it's, you know, we're out of the way, it doesn't really matter. We're kind of not in the zone for those areas that the government's really focusing on. And with so much attention on TfL and HS2, it does feel like we are the poor relation. And that, unfortunately, as you rightly say, affects our residents, all of whom, you know, they pay the taxes, they pay the council tax. The least they can expect is the government to fund roads to a reasonable standard.
Sorry, I think there's somebody on the screen wants to come on. Councillor Hall, thank you.
Yes, Councillor Hill, thank you. I just wanted to comment on a Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee perspective that, you know, we support the revenue and capital budget proposals for 2022 to 23 for the Council's highways and transport services. The committee was satisfied that the major schemes programme remained affordable on the back of other schemes being deferred into the future. The committee acknowledged impacts of the £12 million gap in funding and were pleased to hear that there was ongoing work of leading officers and executive portfolio holders towards a future funding strategy as part of the Highways Infrastructure Asset Management Plan. Members welcomed plans for the allocation of the remainder of £7 million out of the £10 million funds in 2022 to 23, in line with the Highways Asset Management Strategy. The committee expressed a view that the transfer of the transport to school services that was now brought into the Highways budget offered a potential for a thorough examination of that service and the cost pressures that were on the rise to ensure that challenges were mapped and funds were used in the most effective way. Members were assured that there was a structure and governance model around a fundamental review of educational travel and that home to school transport was one of the major transformation activities for Lincolnshire County Council. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think you're also right to highlight the transport issue. We've got homeschool transport, and you know we'll do our best, but that is another budget which isn't highways maintenance, of course, but it is something. It is very challenging, particularly for a large rural county such as ourselves. So that's just one big example of the cost pressures which the council as a whole will have to address, and I'm sure we can save money, but I'm not sure we'll reduce the budget. We'll just reduce the increases as they come forward. So that is a very good example of something else which we've got to do. Did anybody else wish to come in? Okay, just to give a bit of balance, I would say that although we are obviously very disappointed about the reduction in the highways maintenance, we think, which the predicted reduction in highways maintenance grant carrying on for another year, and the lack of substantive progress on the fair funding review, although there, as I think Andrew said, we think there might be some movement. Hopefully that will be in our favour, but we don't know, do we? But I think we should also acknowledge the tremendous support we've had from the government in other matters, particularly the coronavirus outbreak, where over £100 million was given to the County Council alone just to manage that outbreak. And indeed, the general settlement received was better than anticipated, which is all helpful. So I think, you know, the conclusion that Councillor Davis and I have come to is that I think the government has done a reasonable job, but it does seem that it's unfortunate the Department for Transport does seem to be ignoring that bread and butter roles such as mending potholes and roads, and probably has got other priorities, and we just think it should be the other way. So it's not all bad news, but it is, you know, it's disappointing that the Department of Transport doesn't recognise the problem and doesn't seem to understand that this is what the public are saying. It's not something we're making up. We're reacting very clearly to the very clear message we all got from the electorate, and we continue to get with people talking about potholes and then, you know, wanting compensation for their bent wheels and all the rest of it. And we'd really like to be in a position where we just say there aren't as many bent wheels and alloy wheels, and you know, people don't have that inconvenience and cost in the first place. So I'm proposing now that we, in the light of that debate, we actually move an amendment to the recommendations as they are currently printed. So I can refer you to paragraph number 3 of the recommendations. So it will now read under A, so subject to the recommendations 4 below, approve for recommendations to full council. A, the revenue budget for 22-23 proposed in the report, subject to the following amendments. So, first amendment, an increase in the proposed 22-23 highways budget of £12,360,068. Secondly, a new transfer from the earmark reserves of £2,300,000 and reflecting a reduction in the existing coronavirus reserve to a nil balance. Next one, an increase of the county precept in line of £11,726,000, consisting of the proposed additional council tax increase of 1.99%, referred to in recommendation 3 below, which generates additional income of £6.4 million. Also, the collection fund surplus of £3.4 million and increased council tax base of £1.8 million. Also, finally, we reflect the decrease in the business rates retention line of £1.6 million to reflect reduced income and the collection fund deficit. We'll get it right in a minute. Finally, on original C, the levels of council tax proposed on table C and above in Appendix D of the report amended to show an increase in the council tax of 1.99% for general services. That, I believe, Andrew, will actually deliver the £12 million which we require to put that additional money in the budget, but also make sure we recommend a balanced budget for the full council next week. Okay, yep.
That's confirmed, Leader, yeah.
Okay, can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Bradwell, thank you. So, we now vote. So, all in favour of those amended recommendations as been circulated and written. Okay, I see that's unanimous. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrew and Michelle, for that contribution. Okay, we'll now move on then to item 6, which is to enter into a Section 113 agreement with North and North East Lincolnshire for Public Health Services. Basically, we've been, obviously let Wendy come in a minute. We've also been sort of extensive discussions with North and North East Lincolnshire for some time now about having a single public health services for the whole of Greater Lincolnshire. I'm pleased to say those negotiations have come to a head now, and we have got a situation where we can share the Director of Public Health and also that department as well. So I think it's very good news. I think it's a sensible thing to do in terms of Greater Lincolnshire, because you know, together I think we will be able to deliver a much stronger service for all parts of Lincolnshire than others. So I'll let Councillor Bowkett just come in. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's. I think it's a way forward. Looking forward to working with them. Obviously, as portfolio holder, I'm going to be working with Derek. I think it's the only way forward to save money, for one thing, and as a sharing Derek's services with North East is you know, it can only be the way. So yeah, looking forward to getting started and making some decisions.
It is a trial period. It's not the. It is. What's the word we're using? Sorry.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hill. Yes, it's proposed that it's a pilot for 12 to 18 months. We will be establishing a governance group which will have relevant portfolio holders on, relevant officers on, and also representation from each of the integrated care system in order to monitor the progress and evaluate the success of the pilot, which clearly is around much more efficient and effective use of resources, but also around improving the outcomes and reducing health inequalities of our communities. So just to say as well that we have been working with the UK Health Security Agency and Office of Public Health Improvement Disparities, which is the old Public Health England's new phraseology, and they are supportive of the pilot. So again, the recommendation was that it's subject to their ongoing agreement, and just to confirm that, I'm pleased to report that we now have that.
Thank you. I'll just summarise I think there were comments from the Adult Scrutiny Committee, weren't there? There was a general debate, and although they were supportive, there were some questions asked about whether, you know, would that be detrimental to the current public health offer we have in Lincolnshire, and also about how it would the integration would actually work. So I don't know whether Derek, should we let Derek come in on that? So Derek, I mean, you obviously were aware of that debate. Can you just comment in terms of what you heard at the Scrutiny Committee?
Thank you, Leader. As you said, generally there was support from Scrutiny. I think the concern was around, are we diluting the offer to Lincolnshire County Council? As Debbie's already said, my view is very much it's about strengthening the offer across Greater Lincolnshire, focusing on outcomes for the people of Greater Lincolnshire. For example, at the moment in the County Council, we have myself, an Assistant Director, and 2 consultants. When working with North and North East, that will be 6 consultants in public health as specialists across Greater Lincolnshire. So that's going to give us some additional resilience and robustness across the county. As Debbie's already said as well, we will have a governance model where we'll keep reporting through in an oversight group to then make sure all of the scrutinies and executives and cabinets in North and North East Lincolnshire are kept informed. It's 18 months in the first instance, with a decision point at 12 months about whether it's working and whether the 3 councils wish to either make the option permanent, secondly, give it a bit more time to bed in and understand the strengths and challenges, or thirdly, decide it's not working and then we've got 6 months to exit from the arrangement. So we've built in an opportunity to make that decision. I think the final thing I'll say is that we're in conversations with external organisations about providing an evaluation over the 12 months as well. So we'll have an independent evaluation to feed in to that decision point at 12 months, and all 3 councils at that point will be able to decide what they want to happen. But from my perspective, I think we'll have a stronger, more robust Greater Lincolnshire public health function. And the focus, from my perspective, very much is on COVID recovery and making sure we do tackle the inequities and disparities we know are going to come from that.
Thank you, Derek. That sounds very sensible, and as a pilot, I'm sure it will be successful, because as a larger unit, that also gives you more resilience in terms of expertise, but at the same time, making sure that each local area is supported, similar to we do with legal services and other joint services across our part of Lincolnshire. So any comments? I think it sounds very sensible. So recommendations there on page 171, that we improve in principle to enter into this section 113 agreement with North and North East Lincolnshire councils, and we further delegate to the Director of Adult Care to determine the final form and approve in entering into the said agreements in consultation with portfolio holder. Okay. Is that agreed? Thank you. Anybody not agreeing? So again, unanimous. Okay then, we move on to item 7 then, which is the bulky local transport plan. So Councillor Davis.
Thank you. Yes, you're right, Leader. It's by no means a small document. I think one of the things I'd say to colleagues about this is it's very much a document that we need to use to engage with the Department for Transport. It's driven and written around their requirements and what they expect from us as a highways and a transport authority. And I think actually, going back over the last several years, we have a good track record of dealing with the DFT. Present funding problems aside, we have been good at receiving funding for capital schemes, and we have a good working relationship with them on the whole. And actually, I'm pleased that the team are often cited as subject matter experts by people like the DFT, the LGA, elsewhere, when it comes to helping other authorities perform, indicated by we were one of the first authorities, highways authorities, to get a level 3 scoring in the Challenge Fund. So that was really positive. This document, and I appreciate it's not to everybody's tastes in terms of some of the wording. It's very much about an ambition for how we can do things slightly differently moving forward. The reality is, for most of Lincolnshire, car is king and will stay king, certainly I suspect for my lifetime. But in some areas, we can do more to give people options. And I think this is very much what this document is about, is giving people options, but also looking to address some of the issues we know are coming down the line, EV charging, buses, and all these type of issues that we need to start being, in some essences, more proactive. I think I'm handing over to Vanessa and Jason, who are the experts, before I say anything wrong.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. There isn't a whole host more to add to that, in all honesty. Just to remind members that this is a statutory requirement. We have written this very much in line with the DFT guidance on the grounds that we want to be able to present it to them and say, yep, we followed what you've set out, and therefore we expect a fair crack of the whip when it comes to capital investment. It may help with the ongoing conversations around maintenance as well. It can only help to have a good working relationship with them. As part of that statutory requirement, I will just reflect on the fact that we have been out to public consultation. The process and the themes that we set forward as part of this local transport plan have received generally some very positive responses. We've managed to extend the consultation into some areas that perhaps traditionally we wouldn't manage to reach. We managed to get a number of younger people to engage in the process as well, this time being virtual, which was quite good. So in Appendix C, we have laid out some of those recommended changes, and those changes are proposed to be made as part of the change prior to going to full council. Other than that, really, there is not really a whole host more to say around it, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Can we? I think we also just need Councillor Hall to update us on the scrutiny debate. Councillor Hall, hopefully.
Yes. Yeah. So, on the 24th of January 2022, the Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee considered the report on the local transport plan and recorded its support of the recommendations to the executive. The following points were highlighted. Members were satisfied that the consultation exercise that took place as part of it was representative with overall figures in excess of 3,000 website visitors and with around 750 responses to the online survey. Officers added that this rate of response was above and beyond expectations, certainly higher than previous consultations of this nature. It was positive to hear that a wider audience of the younger population, the under 25s of the county, engaged in this consultation exercise, again in relation to previous similar type consultations. Members expressed an interest in how partnership working with district councils was envisaged and how it was expected to work in practice. Officers explained that Lincolnshire County Council is a highway and transport authority. However, partnership working relied heavily on partners' ability to deliver services they are responsible for. It was emphasised that as a partner, LCC had a list of key desires and requirements, for example, around network rail services, and they work closely with other partners to successfully bring these to fruition. A thorough review of all local plans across the whole of Lincolnshire was carried out initially, but identified the aims of these and helped LCC in developing ways for better integrating transport and land use planning. Bus services were mentioned as an industry delivered mainly by the private sector. The service usage was noticeably in decline, owed to the COVID pandemic, among other factors. The plan focused in reversing this negative picture. It was acknowledged that many people across the county relied on a daily basis on these services, and also it was noted that car ownership levels in some areas of the county remained relatively low, notably in Lincoln and in some other more urban areas. Absence in passenger transportation services linking particular locations across the county was emphasised by members who argued that lack of alternatives to driving were echoed in the consultation. The impact of lack of services to the nighttime economy was also brought up, with members maintaining that a nighttime bus service could have been more effective than a daytime service that is underused by the public. Officers gave assurance that they work closely with operators as part of a bus service improvement plan, and that there was an enhanced partnership approach being developed, which will enable operators to work more closely in a partnership and with local authorities, with a clear governance model around it. It was suggested to the committee that Call Connect was likely to be the one of the most efficient and agile models for a rural area, and that there was no area in Lincolnshire that was not actually covered by a bus service if demand responsive transport was included. This model drifted from the traditional model of waiting for the bus at the bus stop and enabled the public to access transportation services on demand. The BSIP was currently on hold waiting for a funding decision later in summer 2022, following which LCC would be working closely with stakeholders, including district colleagues. Members asked for clarification in terms of what the Ltp Implementation Plan encompassed, what is already being developed as part of this, and how long it was expected to take. Whilst acknowledging that the former was a living document and therefore still being developed and optimised, it was also asked that a diagram mapping different strategies is also added to the local transport plan, overarching document to which officers agreed. In addition to the former, officers stated that there was a wider plan of suggested ideas and approaches, particularly around areas like active travel supporting and passenger transport services improvements, that could be adopted across Lincolnshire as part of the implementation plan, and that was to be advised at a later stage of this process. Members echoed that in terms of prioritisation of areas for development, central government often prioritised, for example, housing over roads infrastructure. The implementation plan and strategy were shifting this direction of travel. However, it was argued that LCC would need to swift and streamline partners to that same direction. The electric vehicle charging strategy was discussed, and concerns were raised that the shift to electric vehicles may not be achieved, as these would require the installation of fast charging points. Officers provided assurance that work was being carried out to identify suitable locations for installing charging points. Members inquired whether clean air zone was investigated as part of a plan and noted that it would be beneficial to review data from the time before the Lincoln Eastern bypass was operated and after to verify the impact on air quality for the centre of Lincoln. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So that's a comprehensive report from your committee. Okay then, so are there any comments please on this? Yes, Councillor Corey.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Davies and the officers for this really interesting and welcome document. As Councillor Davies said, for long journeys, car will remain king, whether it's fossil fuel powered or battery powered. But for shorter journeys, and for those in the Greater Lincoln area and Boston and Grantham, it gives people the alternative to be able to use safer routes in, whether they're pedestrians or cyclists, or if they want to travel by horse. And it anticipates the government's recent policy change in changing the hierarchy. So yes, car will remain king, but the hierarchy for those shorter journeys has been changed, and it's very welcome to see that in this document, and I'm happy to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments, please? Councillor Woolley.
Thank you, Leader. Can I just check? I have asked this question before, but I didn't know whether you've gone away and come back again. With the substantive comments on Appendix C, I see that all the district councils are there, apart from South Kesteven District Council, and I just wondered whether you did then, on the back of my last comment, go away, ask them, and come back if you've got an update at all. Thank you.
Yes, indeed, Councillor. Yes, there had been a slight miscommunication from the District Council, it appears, and they hadn't quite been sent to the right place, but we did have subsequently received it, and we have seen it, and we will now build those comments into the draft.
Thank you, Leader.
Thank you.
As the representative for the TFM board, and Jason's here, I've got a meeting on tomorrow, I believe, with Jason and Councillor Swinburne, who's my opposite number at North Lincolnshire, just in case the executive was interested, following the discussions that were at the previous TFN meeting, because certainly Councillor Swinburne and myself had a long sort of discussion afterwards that whilst there were those in Manchester and Liverpool and other areas saying, oh, we've not got train guards, we've not got this, I gently reminded that actually we were quite lucky because neither have we, and we haven't had them for a long time. And actually, if our service gets, and there is a talk of the possible service reduction, if it's reduced anymore, train actually realistically isn't going to be viable for a lot of people in Lincolnshire. So I shall update either yourself directly or any other member of the executive that wants to have that update following the conversation I have with Jason and Councillor Swinburne on Wednesday around that.
That's good. I suppose I could just ask about the challenge of electric vehicles across a rural county like Lincolnshire, and obviously I know that's referred to in the document, but it will be a challenge, and obviously just any comments on how we're going to try and manage that and how it's going to be funded by whoever.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Yes, it is a challenge. It's certainly, I suppose, a bit like fibre optic broadband, etc. The private sector is very keen to go into places where it can get a quick rate of return, so the urban centres. I think some of the conversations we've started to have with some of the EV operators, there are business models where they would be looking at kind of cross-subsidy, so the ability to use the subsidy from the central, the more urban areas to subsidise some of the more rural areas, but still being driven by the private sector. So that is certainly an avenue I think we would be interested in following and just seeing how successful or how realistic that may be, given just the very, very extreme rural nature that some parts of Lincolnshire actually have. But yeah, it's something we're looking at and in conversation with at the moment.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other indication to speak, so I'll move straight on to the recommendations on page 183, which are basically recommends this amended document following further consultation. So that is, we recommend that to the full council to be adopted formally as our County Council Local Transport Plan. Then we also delegate to the Executive Director in consultation with myself and Councillor Davies to approve and make any further amendments as necessary as we move forward. So all those in favour, everybody agreed? Right, it's unanimous. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Right, move on to the next item then, which is Recommissioning Autism and Learning Difficulties Service for Children and Young People. Councillor Bradwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, there's this contract and the next one. They were extended whilst we're in COVID for a year. We're now just looking to go out to obviously move to procure new contracts. I have to say, the autism strategy and the work that comes from that is very important to families. I think that, you know, no one can imagine actually, you know, how difficult it is for some of these young people to actually, you know, maintain their place at school, and the families need a lot of support. So I'll pass you over. I think Charlotte and Catherine are going to say something, you know, tell us about this, but this is a very important policy and service that we give to families in the county. So hand over to Charlotte.
Thank you very much. Apologies I can't be with you in person today. So Executive is being asked to approve the recommissioning of the Autism and Learning Difficulties Service for Children and Young People. And that would be via a public-to-public collaborative agreement made under Regulation 12 of the Public Contract Regulations 2015. Lincolnshire Special Schools and Academies within Lincolnshire SEND Alliance will be asked to submit an expression of interest to provide the service going forward. The agreement would start from the 1st of September this year for an initial period of 3 years, but with the option to extend that for a further 2 years subject to performance. Executive is also asked to approve that the Executive Director of Children's Services, in consultation with the Executive Councillor responsible for Children's Services, that they are delegated the authority to take the necessary decisions relating to the commissioning, awarding and entering into agreement with the successful party. The current service, which is also known as the Working Together Team, started in 2015, and it's a term time only service that's commissioned on behalf of Lincolnshire schools and academies to provide support for autistic children and young people with mild, moderate and severe learning difficulties and social communication challenges, which then impact on their cognitive development and their learning potential. The service offers training and workshops to upskill mainstream school staff with the knowledge, tools and confidence that they need to create inclusive, autism-friendly environments and support children and young people to remain educated in their mainstream settings. Direct outreach work is then also available for children and young people, and it's provided following referral and only after schools have completed the relevant training. The service is currently provided as a collaboration between 3 Lincolnshire Special School Academies, so the Lincolnshire Wolds Federation, Spalding Special Schools Federation and Gosberton House Academy. Lincolnshire Schools Forum agreed to the use of the Designated Schools Grant to fund this service, and the current service agreement is due to end at the end of August this year. The annual value is £617,500. The service is part of the Inclusive Lincolnshire Strategy, which was established in 2015 to address, at the time, rising and unsustainable rates of permanent exclusion from schools in Lincolnshire. And hopefully you will have had opportunity within your pack to have a look at the commissioning plan, which is attached at Appendix 1, and it sets out in detail the findings of the review. Some of those key findings that we'd asked Executive to note are that whilst this service isn't a statutory service in itself, it does support the council in fulfilling a number of duties to children and young people in support of their education, and particularly for those children with special educational needs and disabilities. despite rising numbers of children and young people with SEND, which is a national picture, as well as in Lincolnshire, and Lincolnshire having likely more children and young people that are autistic than prevalence data would expect, there are less pupils in Lincolnshire special schools that are autistic or with severe learning difficulties compared to England's the England and regional averages. Since the service started, the suspension and exclusion of children and young people with SEND has reduced significantly, despite rising numbers of pupils with SEND, and Lincolnshire is performing better than national and regional averages. The service is rated good in terms of its performance, and feedback from service users and schools has been overwhelmingly positive. Schools Forum is supportive of the recommendations in this paper. The service has also received a national commendation from the National Autistic Society. Looking to the future then, it's recommended that we continue to commission this service with some minor adjustments based on the review findings. So most notably, we want to continue the training and workshop offer because that builds sustainability in Lincolnshire schools. But we also want to make sure that we utilise virtual resources, but only where that is appropriate. We want to make sure that our early years workforce is included in accessing that training and workshop provision. And we want to make sure that parents and carers can also access some workshop provision as well. Schools will still be expected to access training and use our Ask Sal advice line before requesting direct outreach support. There will be a greater emphasis on partnership working with early years professionals to support transition to school at reception age, because we note that there's quite a number of referrals to the service specifically focused within that early years age range. We're looking to make sure that there's a really strong coordinated offer across other services such as the Behaviour Outreach Support Service, Early Help and Healthy Minds Lincolnshire, for example, so a much more child-centred multidisciplinary approach. We'll continue to focus on supporting schools, but also challenging them to ensure that more children and young people are able to access their mainstream provision and have their needs met without the need for an education, health and care plan or going to a special school. We remain absolutely committed to a sector-led approach of schools supporting schools, which is why we continue to feel that the best option is to utilise the skills of special schools to support their mainstream colleagues, hence the recommendation to approach the SEND Alliance of Special Schools and Academies in Lincolnshire to recommission the service. The proposal is that the service will continue to be funded from the designated schools budget and that the current budget remains sufficient to deliver the service with no reduction of staffing anticipated. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Charlotte. So, Councillor Smith, I think you're working hard today. You're actually going to give the scrutiny comments on behalf of the Children's Scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. The committee was disappointed to learn of the removal of the funding for local authority school improvement monitoring and Brooking grant for school improvement activities supporting maintained schools, which would be managed by the council from April 2022. While a review was undertaken, it was recognised that this could have a detrimental impact on small schools in Lincolnshire. The committee requested a report back to a future meeting outlining some options and recommendations for responding to the removal of this funding. The following points were... Oh, that's to do with the budget, apologies. The Children and Young People's Scrutiny Committee unanimously supported the proposals for children's services for 22-23, including funding of the cost pressures for children's social care services. The committee congratulated its officers on an excellent report, despite the difficult financial challenges facing the committee. And sorry. As has already been alluded to, special educational needs, delegated funding to schools and services to the sector has been highlighted, and the lower than average cost of children in care in Lincolnshire due to the internal fostering system was also highlighted as well. But the principal sort of point of concern, if you will, was around the funding removal.
Thank you. Heather, do you want to just deal with that? Obviously, apart from that, there was support for the
Yes.
recommendation. So can we just deal with this concern about the alleged removal of funding?
Yes, thank you, Leader. The removal of the funding is around school improvements, or slightly separate to this service for the decision today. So the government has decided to remove funding that we get for school improvement services, which supports the work that we do. And what we have done is, in the budget proposals, we've agreed to review our school improvement approach over the next year to come back with some proposals before then that can be implemented in time.
Thank you. Further comments, please? Yes, Councillor Burkett.
Yeah, I just like to think that, just to say that this is an absolute fantastic service. I think, you know, over Lincolnshire, I mean, if you've got a child with autism, you do struggle. So offering, you know, school places that keeps them at home alongside maybe their peers, you know, their other brothers and sisters, I think it's really good. But also there is that they can go to special schools if needed. So I do think it's an excellent service that we do that we give.
Okay, and this is actually funded from the DSG, the pot of money which the schools themselves control. So it's in their interest, but also I think we've learned that it is very much in the interests of everybody to make sure that less children have to go into special schools, which I think we all agree that they're much better in the mainstream. So the question I've got is obviously inviting expressions of interest from the SEND Alliance in Lincolnshire. So what happens if those expressions of interest aren't deemed satisfactory?
Thanks, Leader. So, I mean, Charlotte might want to come in on the process, but the expressions of interest will go through a robust process in order to quality assure those. They have been delivering this service for a long time now, and as you've heard, the service is rated good and also is really valued by schools. So we're reasonably confident that actually they know how to do this and that they've been delivering this with good value for money for quite some time. But there is a robust process in terms of evaluating them. I'll ask Sarah to add a little bit more detail, or Charlotte, to that.
Yeah, I can come in. Yeah, so absolutely. As part of the consideration of the review, we look at you know, where's the best place to effectively advertise the service, and we have considered whether this should be a service that goes out for open procurement to the wider market. But first of all, we know that the service has performed really well through a partnership approach with 3 of our special school academies. We also know through conversations and engagement, or we are highly confident that they would continue to be interested in the provision of this service. And so we expect that there will be, you know, there will be special schools who are interested in putting forward an expression of interest to deliver this. I think the reality is that if the expression of interest process found that there were no interested parties, then we would be considering an alternative of going to the market. But I think that we feel highly confident that that won't be necessary because we've been engaging with schools throughout this.
Thank you. That explains. So if it fails out to the market, I'm sure you're confident that it will be provided within Lincolnshire, but I think we should all be clear that there are still options open should the expressions of all the bids, if you want to call them, are not deemed acceptable for whatever reason, although you seem very confident they will be. Okay, any further questions? Yes, Councillor McNally.
Thank you, Leader. It's just a question on, obviously it's a term time thing, there's more and more autism being sort of identified. Who sort of takes up the slack when term time ends? Is it NHS or?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor McNally. So children have a range of needs, and we assess the children's needs if they get to the point where we think that they might need some support outside of term time, and that's delivered through our respite service, and that's for children who have quite complex needs who need some support. There is also in Lincolnshire a huge network of voluntary groups. We also have our holiday activities that you've had a report on previously as well. So there is a whole range of other activities that are there to support families, but this service specifically is about supporting mainstream schools and special schools to support children to stay in school and stay engaged with their learning. Those enrichment activities beyond are in a slightly different network.
Thank you. Any further comments, questions? Okay, we move to the recommendations there on page 386. Basically, that we approve the recommissioning of this service and invite expressions of interest from the Lincolnshire Send Alliance and for agreement to commence on the 1st of September of this year. And secondly, we delegate to the Executive Director for Children's Services in consultation with the Executive Council of Children's Services for any changes that are deemed necessary. All in favour? Those in favour, please show, please. Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Charlotte. Moving on to item 9 then, which is recommissioning of behaviour outreach support services for children and young people, otherwise known as BOSS. Right, Councillor Bradwell.
Yeah, well, as has been mentioned in the previous paper, this service goes alongside the other one, really, because obviously this is, well, it goes back to 2016, as it says in the paper, and I do remember schools were having a torrid time, you know, with children, with their behaviour, lots of exclusions, and, you know, it's no good for children to be at home, and that they need to be in school, they need to be learning. And this is when we put together this service then, and it has been very successful. Actually, the service does work with schools and to try and you know, help the young people who obviously have behaviour issues, and with parents as well. So again, I'll hand over, I think, to Charlotte this time. I don't know, I'll be told if I've got it wrong. So, as I say, it's very similar, fits with the other service, and is highly regarded, again, by schools. Schools at the time, in 2016, were really struggling, and obviously this service plays a good part in trying to keep children in school. So, hand over to Charlotte.
Thank you. So Executive is asked to approve the recommendation to recommission the BOSS service through an open competitive tender process. The new contract would also start from the 1st of September and run for 3 years with an option to extend for a further 2 years. Executive is also asked to approve that the Exec Director of Children's Services, in consultation with the Executive Councillor responsible for Children's Services, that they're delegated authority to take the necessary decisions relating to the procurement, awarding and entering into the agreement with the successful bidder. The service also forms part of the Inclusive Lincolnshire strategy, which was established to respond and address the rising and sustainable rate of permanent exclusions within Lincolnshire schools at the time. BOSS is currently provided by Family Action, and they were successful in the procurement process a few years ago. The current contract will expire at the end of August. And prior to the current contract, Lincolnshire Schools Forum agreed to the use of the Designated Schools Grant to fund this service to support the sector. The annual value of the agreement is just over £1.2 million. The current BOSS service runs term time only and works with children and young people who are at risk of exclusion from Lincolnshire schools and academies, and it aims to reduce the number of pupils that are at risk of exclusion and those that are excluded. BOSS delivers direct intervention support with pupils, and again there's a workshop and training offer to the school workforce to try and make sure that those professionals can support children to stay within their mainstream school. A commissioning review of the BOSS service has been completed, and the commissioning plan is included within the PACS Appendix 1. BOSS isn't a statutory service in itself, but the council does have duties as set out in the report to the education of children and young people, and particularly to those children and young people that are excluded. The financial impact of exclusion is significant, with the cost of alternative provision up to £17,000 a year more expensive than mainstream education, and the council is sort of responsible for meeting all if not the majority of costs in relation to that. The service is currently rated good in terms of performance, and feedback from service users and schools has been very positive. Schools Forum continues to be supportive of the recommendations in the paper. Since the service started, the suspension and permanent exclusion of pupils in Lincolnshire has significantly reduced. Lincolnshire is now performing better than most statistical neighbours, regional and national averages, for both suspension and permanent exclusion rates. And that's also the case for children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, both with or without an education, health and care plan. Performance data shows that boys continue to be overrepresented within the referrals through to the Behaviour Outreach Support Service, with 77% of referrals for males. This is also the same nationally. Causative factors in terms of those referrals to the service show that over half of the children and young people open to BOSS have experienced issues within their home environment, including trauma, and over half have additional needs, which could include SEND or mental health concerns, for example. Of those children and young people supported by BOSS in 2021, 2% were ultimately permanently excluded. Evidence tells us that vulnerable children are more likely to be excluded from school. Any future service must ensure that the training and support that is provided is trauma-informed and understands the causes of challenging behaviour and doesn't just address the behaviour itself. It will be imperative that other services wrap around children and families alongside BOSS as appropriate. That might be the council's early help teams, or it could be commission provisions such as Healthy Minds Lincolnshire, for example. Looking to the future, it's recommended that we continue to commission the service with some minor adjustments based on the review findings. So we want the service to continue to be provided term time. We want to continue to have a training and workshop offer in person, online and virtually, but only as appropriate. And it should include joint delivery with other services. So, for example, Healthy Minds or our SEND service or early help. And throughout the pandemic, actually, it's worth noting that BOSS and Healthy Minds have worked really, really closely and delivered some really fantastic joint training and support to families that's been highly valued. And we'd want to strengthen and grow that going forward. There will continue to be a core offer that schools will be expected to complete before accessing any outreach support. There will also be non-core training and workshops available to professionals and also parents and carers, because we feel it's really important that there's consistency between the education setting and also the home environment as well. And so that will be further supported. Targeted and intensive outreach support will continue to be provided to schools and academies and accessed via referral to the council's pupil reintegration team. Direct interventions should involve parents and carers, again, to make sure that there's consistent and evidence-based strategies being used at home and within settings. We want schools and BOSS to work in a more coordinated way with our other services where relevant, so early help and emotional wellbeing services, and not in isolation from each other, again with a focus of a more child-centred multidisciplinary approach. The proposal is that the service will be recommissioned via an open competitive tender, because we consider that there is a sufficient market from within which to undertake that exercise, and also continue to be funded from the designated schools budget. It's felt that the current budget remains sufficient to deliver the service. The current funding for BOSS includes funding for restorative practice, with some training currently that has been subcontracted when required, but it's not envisaged that this subcontracting will be needed in future, as the staff that work in the BOSS service are sufficiently trained to directly deliver this approach now, and it would be highly likely that those staff would be transferred into any future provision going forward, although that would be obviously part of any direct negotiations with any successful bidder. going forward. It is recognised, however, that to deliver the recommended model, there may be some additional costs in terms of further training and upskilling of staff, making sure that we're getting the level right for everybody. But in previous years, we've had some underspend within the contract, which has either been recovered back to the council or it's been reinvested into suitable work within BOSS. So we're confident that the budget that is available will be sufficient to deliver the new model despite some of those changes. The new contract will continue to be just over £1.2 million per annum, or just under £6.5 million over the lifetime of the contract, exclusive of VAT. It's a requirement now for the council as of the 1st of January 2022 that all contract values that we publish need to be calculated inclusive of VAT, and whether VAT is applicable or not will be dependent on whether the winning bidder is required to pay VAT or not. So, for example, as is currently the case, it's provided by a charity, then they wouldn't be required in terms of that payment. That will mean that the procurement values for BOSS would be advertised inclusive of VAT, and it would make the maximum annual value £1.5 million per annum, although the council would then claim back that additional amount. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Charlotte. So, Councillor, the scrutiny comments have been included. Are there any additional ones you wish to make, Councillor Smith, on behalf of the scrutiny?
Thank you, Leader. I think Charlotte has gone through it fairly conclusively, actually. A question, if I may be slightly cheeky. It says in the report that the majority of referrals to BOSS, 77% are male. Why is that? It's a curiosity, if it could be in.
I will allow you to ask the question, as you've been working hard today on behalf of scrutiny. So, a good question, actually. Thank you.
Thank you. So that representation is there both in Lincolnshire, and it's also there nationally, and unfortunately it's also there in our pupil referral units where our excluded children go. I guess the reasons around why that is to do with the behaviour exhibited by boys in schools and the decisions that are made around that in comparison to some of the challenging behaviours made by girls in schools. And obviously the support from the boss, that it comes through schools asking for support, and usually they've put other interventions in place. So obviously schools are needing more support in that area. But it was a point that was raised by our scrutiny committee as well. And one of the things they were very keen to ensure was that when children were then in our pupil referral units and where there was that gender imbalance, that actually that was still an environment that was effective for the females who were in a much lower gender balance. And we were able to reassure them about the class sizes in those settings, and about actually the fact that the reason they're in those settings is for quite intense intervention. So we do tend to have high adult ratios and lots of support in there so that children get a bit more of an individualised curriculum.
Thank you. That was useful. I mean, I think probably, yes, I think there's some smiling and gloating going on in certain quarters of this chamber, but we'll say it. But I suppose internally, because if it's mostly males, we do need to inject some female or other into that equation, because otherwise that could just reinforce the behaviour and the stereotypes, couldn't it?
So I think what we need to do is make sure we keep the balances and the different types of behaviour in those settings appropriate. For the BOSS service, obviously, these are referrals that come through for individual children who will be in gender-balanced classes. So they'll be in classes that have the normal distribution. I mean, obviously, it's a really difficult conversation, isn't it? We know the population in prisons is also completely gender imbalanced as well. And I think there's some, really big questions to be asked there, that this service, but for this service, most of the children aren't excluded and are in gender balanced classes, although the boys are receiving more intervention for their behaviour.
Thank you. Any further questions? Good. I'm not saying yes. Councillor Troyd, have you got some expert intelligence, your local intelligence you can tell us on?
No, I'm not sure about that. I was just looking at the service performance, and obviously 408 new referrals with 57 being continued from the year before. Is the 57 a typical sort of overcarry from the previous year, or is that going up? Or because obviously it's going to grow and grow and grow if we're not careful, isn't it? If they still remain excluded.
Yeah, if I can come in, Leader. So just to be clear, the vast majority of children who the boss works with are not excluded and do not end up getting excluded. So those children, so those that hang over, it's because actually what happens is children's needs don't present neatly year by year. So you'll always have an element of children whose need may have arisen in the summer term and need to continue to have support for the autumn and spring term, and so you'll always get some transition. I think what we always try and aim to do, as all schools would do, is try and make sure that where those interventions can neatly conclude within an academic year, children start that new academic year with a chance to not need that intervention and to see how that goes. But they're not excluded children that are transferring over, and our numbers in our pupil referral units, the Wellspring Academy, have consistently come down over time, particularly for those with permanent exclusion. And our numbers of permanent exclusion have come down dramatically since this service was introduced.
Thank you. And I'd just really like to reinforce that point that having worked with young people either excluded or at risk of exclusion a number of years ago, I applaud this service. I fully support us continuing it. Once you start excluding a child from school, you're excluding them from society, and it can end up as a downward trail. So anything that we can do to keep our young people in school has to be a good thing. So very much supporting.
Thank you. So in terms of, I think it's a very interesting question, Councillor Trident. So I suppose it does, how is success measured? Obviously you referred to people not being, or children not being excluded, but then I think the inference is, do you measure whether, you get how many children are then sort of on the straight and narrow, so, or, sort of in the mainstream, and how many of them, bearing in mind, we are dealing with challenging individuals, is it measured how, in the broader sense, that these children are then go on to have a sort of active part of and productive part of society? I'll be interested in that.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and I think Charlotte might want to come in and add a little bit more detail to this. But yes, certainly one way in which we measure it is whether or not they end up excluded, because the reason they're referred in is because the professionals in the setting genuinely think that's the trajectory that they're on. The other thing we do is for anyone to receive a service from the behaviour outreach support team, they have to have a pastoral support plan in place. So that pastoral support plan outlines very clearly what the needs of that young person are and how they need to be addressed and how we'll know we have a success, and we're able to evaluate the success of those pastoral support plans. We're also able to look at how we how many of those children might revisit back into service maybe 3 years later. We know that children who've received a service in primary school may need an enhanced transition to secondary school to ensure that those behaviours don't re-exhibit as they're suddenly in a very different environment, and we work really closely with schools about that.
Charlotte, thank you. So I think they need your help here. So it's just, I thought that was a very good explanation actually, but in terms of looking at the whole person and their future, I'm just interested how that's collectively, it's not just the boss service, how collectively as a public service we try and do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Heather's obviously articulated some of the ways that we try and capture how successful the service has been. And equally, we also obtain feedback directly from service users and their families in terms of their own viewpoints as to how it supported them. So we capture a lot of data. I think the thing with this service, because it sort of only started a few years ago, we've not got really extensive years of cohorts who have then found their way out of education from the sense of they're at an age where they're entering the workforce potentially, or potentially then going on to university and learning at an older age. But it's absolutely something that we, you know, across children's services, we look at, you know, we look at other data. It's trying to triangulate it, and I think that actually going forward, it's something that we could probably strengthen within the new commission service, because we do track back and say, okay, after a period of time when a child or young person no longer needs the support of BOSS, have we heard from them again? Which might be an indication that they need more support, and the support that they've had in place, you know, that might indicate that they needed more support, for example. But I think that going forward, we probably need to think about looking back on a longer term for those pupils, and then also across the council, how we might then track that through. Yeah, that's what I would add. But I think in terms of the actual service itself, we do track a lot of data for the cohort that they're working with over a period of time, but maybe not so much as they come to be adults. But we can strengthen that.
Thank you. That's useful. Any further questions, comments, please? Good. Right. Okay. The recommendations there on page 447. So there are two, really, which is approve the recommissioning of the BOSS service and to commence on the 1st of September for 2 years, potentially, and also as usual, delegates to the director and the portfolio holder for any changes within that. All those in favour? Very good. That was carried unanimously. Very good. End of that, I believe, concludes the meeting. So thank you very much for your attendance, and safe journey home. Thank you.